Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Fisher, and welcome to my world. And recently, that world welcomed a new hero to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Shang-Chi. And, being a lifelong Marvel fan, I was eager to see what he had to offer to the ever-evolving MCU. Because after watching the trailer and reading up on the character, I was more curious than excited about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. It's a Marvel movie, and I'm a lifelong Marvel fan, so of course I plan to see it on opening night. But honestly, I didn't know what to expect from it. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been unfolding and evolving for over a decade now. With each movie, the bar for excellence just keeps rising. But Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings faced more challenges than most. From the outset, this movie was billed as something different from your typical Marvel movie. It was set to be this action-packed adventure full of fast-paced fights and family drama. Moreover, it would bring a new hero to the MCU at a time when it needs new heroes. All of that certainly has plenty of appeal, but there were still numerous uncertainties. Whereas most non-comic book fans know about Captain America, Iron Man, and Spider-Man, very few know Shang-Chi. I freely admit I didn't know much about him before seeing this movie. I know he's been around since the 1970s, but I've only read a handful of comics where he's shown up. Even so, Marvel Studios has proven before that they can take obscure characters and turn them into pop culture icons. They did it with Guardians of the Galaxy. I trusted that they could do the same with Shang-Chi. Now, after having seen the movie and having had time to process it, I'm ready to give my overall review. But in terms of my initial knee-jerk reaction to Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, I'll just say this. Yes, Marvel Studios has once again succeeded. It took this unknown character from the comics and used him to craft an incredible cinematic spectacle. It also introduced us to a new cast of characters who are every bit as endearing, including a compelling villain who challenges the hero in unique ways. Shang-Chi is a damn good movie, plain and simple. That's the simplest reaction I can offer. But beyond the basics, this movie ended up being more than just another superhero spectacle. It delivered in ways I never anticipated. Whereas Guardians of the Galaxy was more a pleasant surprise than anything else, Shang-Chi felt bigger and bolder. To explain the why and how, I'll need to provide a deeper review. And that review will contain some major spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, this is your time to click away and see for yourself. Again, it's a damn good movie. It's worth seeing unspoiled. Now, having given those warnings, there are many details worth highlighting in Shang-Chi. The movie begins with some heavy exposition, introducing us to Shang-Chi's parents, Ying Li and Zhu Wenwu, aka the Mandarin. Although he doesn't actually go by that name, but that's a detail I'll touch on later. This insight into his parents is critical because, like his comic book counterpart, Shang-Chi's story is heavily defined by his parents, more so than most superheroes. Now, in the comics, his family relationships tend to be very antagonistic, but their story in the MCU is a lot more nuanced. Zhu Wenwu, his father, starts off as this ruthless, immortal warrior, one who wields immense power through the Ten Rings. And he demonstrates that power to great effect, taking down entire armies with ease. But then, while searching for the mystical land of Ta Lo, he meets its guardian, Ying Li, a woman who can actually match his skill. And what begins as this intense battle turns into a powerful love story, one which factors heavily into later events. It's not unreasonable to say that this movie, more than any other MCU movie to date, is heavily driven by the love story that unfolds within it. And as a romance fan who has seen many subpar romances in the MCU, that was incredibly refreshing. The love between Li and Wenwu results in the birth of Shang-Chi and his sister, Xialing. For a time, it seems like this love has softened Wenwu. He's still the leader of the Ten Rings, wielding immense power while commanding an army of skilled warriors, but power and bloodlust aren't his primary motivators anymore. His family is what matters most to him. For a time, he even puts away his rings, simply living as a devoted husband and father to his children. He still trains them to be strong and to fight, but his love for his family is never in question. But all that changes when his wife is killed by rival assassins. Suddenly, this balance that he finally achieved is gone, and the lives of his children are forever changed. This is where Wenwu's story becomes Shang-Chi's story. And his story offers a unique kind of hero's journey. It's not one defined by being born with superpowers or unexpectedly gaining such power. As a young adult, Shang-Chi is already a skilled fighter, having trained in martial arts since he was a child. But what he chose to do with those skills was not ultimately in line with what his father intended. Instead of becoming this tool of vengeance, he ran away from that world, settling in San Francisco and building a simpler life for himself. It's certainly not a flashy life. He parks cars for a living and sings karaoke with his friends on the weekends. But he's generally happy, and he's not the least bit inclined to go back. That all changes when he's attacked by his father's henchmen. And this triggers what is by far the most defining aspect of this movie, the fight scenes. Because if you only need one reason to see this movie, it's definitely the fight scenes. Marvel movies have always had their share of action and combat, but Shang-Chi's fight scenes are more visceral and fast-paced. There are few special weapons and no fancy suits or shields. It's just pure, hand-to-hand fighting in the mold of classic kung fu cinema. Considering that Shang-Chi's origins were closely aligned with the kung fu cinema craze from the 70s, that's very befitting. And once that fighting begins, everything escalates. The story takes us from San Francisco to Macau, from Macau to the secret headquarters of the Ten Rings, and from there to the mystical city of Ta Lo. And every step of the way, and through every fight that unfolds, the stakes intensify. But within those stakes, there's also a lot of high drama. And it's here where Shang-Chi really surprised me in the best possible way. Because if you only go by the trailer, drama is far from the main selling point of this movie. And if you're familiar with Shang-Chi in the comics, the type of drama you get is usually pretty narrow, often boiling down to Shang-Chi clashing with his father. But this movie adds more layers to that conflict. In the MCU, his father isn't the devious, ruthless Mandarin. True, he's not a nice guy, as the flashbacks clearly demonstrate, but he's not outright evil. Yes, he's a man who spent 1,000 years as this powerful, immortal warrior, but he's also a man who lost the woman he loves, and he wants nothing more than to get her back and potentially reunite his family. In terms of villainous motivations, it's not just understandable, it's downright sympathetic. He might not be as charismatic as Eric Killmonger or Thanos, but what he's after isn't malicious, it's just intentionally personal. And for a time, you kind of want to see Shang-Chi team up with his father and sister. Wenwu does make a compelling case that his wife might still be alive, and they can save her if they can just find their way back to Ta Lo. It's tempting, and it's clear that a part of Shang-Chi wants to believe that. But eventually, the full truth comes out. And suddenly, Shang-Chi has to fight his own father. He has to stop him from releasing a far greater evil into this world. It's a battle that's very personal, as well as very epic in terms of scale. And this is where all that world building comes into play. Both the nature of the Ten Rings and the mystical land of Ta Lo get plenty of development. Like Wakanda and other famous MCU locales, the places and people within become integral to the story. It's not just about Shang-Chi and his father. They're just the biggest pieces in a much broader conflict. That conflict doesn't just manifest in incredible fight scenes, complete with mystical weapons and flying dragons. It gives every character a chance to contribute in some meaningful way. Some even manage to shine in unexpected ways. His sister Xialing and his friend Katie all get their moments to kick ass. The story even manages to give Trevor Slattery, aka the fake Mandarin from Iron Man 3, a critical role. And once again, Ben Kingsley is incredibly charming at every turn. He even manages to find an adorable pet in the faceless Morris, who might very well be the cutest creature in the MCU since Baby Groot. every event and every character involved helps move this story forward. And in the end, it's Shang-Chi who has to deliver the final punch, literally and figuratively. He's the one who has to accept the truth that his father won't. And along the way, he has to enjoy his share of setbacks and defeats. But in doing so, he learns and grows, ultimately becoming the hero he needs to be, both for this story and for the future of the MCU. Speaking of which, I will confirm that this movie does have multiple post-credit scenes, and both scenes set Shang-Chi up to play a larger role in the MCU in the future. I won't spoil them, I'll just say that there is some lingering mystery, as well as some incredible karaoke. Overall, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is one of those movies that delivers far more than you expect. It's just so dense with drama and substance. Nothing ever feels contrived or forced. It's one of those movies that feels longer than it actually is, but in a good way. And in terms of plot and pacing, Shang-Chi is very diligent. There are times when it does drag a bit, but that almost feels necessary. This movie is tasked with establishing a new character in the MCU while also building up the entire world around him, all within a 2-hour time frame. It is indeed a tall order, but one that Shang-Chi succeeds in delivering while also providing plenty of action and MCU-style humor. It's certainly not without its flaws. This movie does rely a bit too heavily on flashbacks to fill in major plot details, and those flashbacks aren't always seamless. In addition, I feel like the nature of the Ten Rings wasn't explored enough. Because this is an organization with roots that go back to the first Iron Man movie. They were a terrorist organization in that story, but in Shang-Chi, they feel more like a major crime syndicate. It's really not clear what they are or what their goals entail. And the movie didn't do much to weave them into those events, aside from incorporating Trevor Slattery. But by the end, the door remains open to explore those connections. And the MCU has a proven track record in terms of making the right connections from movie to movie, often leading towards a major payoff in the long run. But even without that long view perspective, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is an incredible achievement. Once again, Marvel Studios shows why it's the gold standard for cinematic spectacles. It gives us yet another incredible hero to embrace, and it sets the stage for Shang-Chi to contribute to the MCU in other ways down the line. It has action, adventure, drama, fantasy, and a surprising amount of heart. At a time when the Marvel Cinematic Universe is entering a bold new phase, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings sets a high bar. And if this is what we can expect moving forward, then the future of the MCU remains as promising as ever. If it continues to thrive, it'll have us all singing Hotel California soon enough. Trust me, you'll get that reference once you see the movie. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, take care and stay safe.